Overthinking doesn't feel like a problem at first. It feels like you're doing something useful, like you're actively working through things, trying to understand, trying to figure things out, trying to get it right. And that's exactly why it's so hard to stop. Because it doesn't feel like avoidance, it feels like effort. You sit there, going through scenarios, breaking things down, looking at different angles, thinking about what could happen, what might go wrong, what you should do next. It feels like you're preparing yourself, like you're getting closer to clarity the more you think. But nothing actually changes. The situation stays the same. Your position doesn't move, and the decision you're trying to make doesn't get any clearer. Yet your mind keeps going. This is where overthinking becomes deceptive. It gives you the feeling of progress without any real movement. It creates the sense that you're doing something important, when in reality, you're just circling the same point from different directions. And because it feels like effort, you don't question it. You trust it. You assume that if you just think a little longer, you'll finally land on something solid. That one more pass through the situation will give you the answer you're looking for. But it never does. Because overthinking isn't designed to lead you forward. It's designed to keep you safe. Your brain treats uncertainty as something that needs to be controlled. And when you don't have a clear answer, it tries to create one by thinking through every possible outcome. Not because it's efficient, but because it reduces the feeling of risk. When you overthink, you're not solving the situation. You're trying to eliminate the possibility of making a mistake. And that's a completely different goal. Because if your goal is to avoid mistakes, your brain won't let you settle on a decision. It will keep generating more possibilities, more variables, more angles to consider, making sure nothing is overlooked. But the more possibilities you create, the harder it becomes to choose. So instead of moving forward, you stay in place. This is why overthinking feels productive. You're actively engaged. You're analyzing, evaluating, considering. Your mind is working, and that activity creates the illusion that something meaningful is happening. But progress isn't measured by how much you think. It's measured by whether anything changes. And in overthinking, nothing changes. You revisit the same thoughts, the same concerns, the same questions, just with slightly different wording. You move through them again and again, hoping that repetition will eventually lead to clarity. But repetition without action doesn't create resolution. It creates exhaustion. And over time, that exhaustion starts to feel like effort. You think you've been working on the problem, but in reality, you've been holding yourself inside it. You haven't moved closer to a solution. You've just deepened your familiarity with the uncertainty. That's why overthinking often leads to feeling stuck. Because you've spent so much time inside the thought process that stepping out of it feels unnatural. You've built momentum in thinking, not in action. And momentum matters. The more time you spend thinking without acting, the harder it becomes to act. Not because you're incapable, but because your brain has adapted to staying in analysis mode. It starts to feel safer there. Action introduces variables you can't control. Thinking keeps everything contained, so your brain keeps you in the place where everything can still be managed, even if that place doesn't actually move you forward. This is also why overthinking can feel addictive. It gives you a sense of engagement. It fills your attention. It creates the feeling that you're doing something important, something necessary, something responsible. But that feeling is misleading because real progress often feels simpler, and simplicity doesn't always feel like enough. Making a decision, taking a step, moving forward, these things can feel almost too easy compared to the complexity your mind creates. So you hesitate. You go back to thinking. You try to refine it more, understand it better, make it clearer before you act. But clarity doesn't come from thinking alone. It comes from movement. And as long as you stay inside the thought process, waiting for it to deliver certainty, you stay in the same place. This is the loop. You feel uncertain. You start thinking to resolve it. The thinking creates more possibilities. More possibilities create more uncertainty. So you think more. And each time you go through this loop, it reinforces itself. Because your brain learns that thinking is your response to uncertainty. So the next time you feel unsure, it doesn't pause. It goes straight into analysis. Automatically. That's why overthinking doesn't feel optional. It feels like something that just happens. But here's the shift. Overthinking isn't solving the problem. It's postponing the moment you have to face it. As long as you're thinking, you don't have to decide. You don't have to act. You don't have to deal with the outcome. And that creates a kind of temporary comfort. Because uncertainty feels easier when it's still theoretical. But the longer you stay there, the heavier it becomes. Because nothing resolves on its own. At some point, movement is required. And the more you delay it, the more pressure builds around it. That's why overthinking eventually turns into frustration. You realize you've spent all this time inside your head, but you're still in the same position. Nothing has changed. And that creates tension. Not because you didn't think enough, but because thinking was never the thing that was needed. So the way out isn't to think better. It's to recognize when thinking has stopped being useful. There's a point where analysis becomes repetition, where you're no longer gaining new insight, just reprocessing the same information. And that's the point where continuing doesn't help. It just keeps you in place. Instead of asking, have I thought about this enough? The better question is, am I getting anything new from this? And if the answer is no, then staying in the thought isn't productive. It's just familiar. That's when you step out. Not because everything is perfectly clear, but because it doesn't need to be. You don't need complete certainty to move forward. You need enough clarity to take the next step. And that step is what creates the next layer of understanding. Not more thinking. Because once you act, something changes. You get feedback. You see what actually happens. You move from possibilities into reality. And reality simplifies things in a way thinking never can. It removes the infinite. It narrows the path. And that's where progress begins. So the next time you find yourself overthinking, pay attention to what it feels like. If it feels like movement, but nothing is actually changing, you're not progressing. You're looping. And the only way out of a loop isn't to complete it. It's to step out of it. Because overthinking feels like work. But real movement happens when you stop thinking just enough to finally move.